Ed, Edd and Eddy is a classic 2000s cartoon I grew up watching alongside a myriad of other shows such as Courage the Cowardly Dog, Codename Kids Next Door, Samurai Jack, and countless more. Those were just the ones that immediately come to my mind. And of all those shows, Ed, Edd and Eddy was probably the one that had the most influence on me, both good and bad. And I firmly believe it was because of the way each and every one of those characters in that show were written. Now, among the cast, the one I resonated with the most on the deep and philosophical level was Eddy, the most deceitful, duplicitous deviant in that entire cul-de-sac. Now, what does this have to do with today's story? Well, I was grabbing my mail earlier today and I stumbled upon my neighbor's kid. He was driving around in one of those child-sized electric cars that you can buy at like any toy store. Well, Toys R Us is dead now, so I guess I know Walmart sells them, but yeah, he was driving around in one of those things. And it was at this moment where I ran into him. I was struck with the most embarrassing wave of nostalgic whiplash I've ever had in my 20s. And I swear I thought I'd sealed these memories away in the deepest, darkest recesses of my mind, never to see the light of day again. You know, like the Pharaoh from Yu-Gi-Oh! And at this point, you're probably wondering what the correlation is between these two things. Well, as I stated earlier, I watched Ed, Edd and Eddy pretty much any time it was airing when I was growing up. And keep in mind, the main characters of that show, the Eds, specifically Eddy, were obsessed with this one trivial goal of making enough money to buy these bowling ball sized jawbreakers. Now, the way they tried to do this was by utilizing all three of their combined brain cells, 2.5 of which belonging to Double D, to formulate a good old fashioned scam. Now, let's fast forward to today. Every time I hear the words scam or scheme or any variation of the two, I have this mental awakening in my mind. It triggers some kind of Winter Soldier episode where my eyes roll in the back of my head, my hair slicks back completely like Homelander from The Boys, and I just become this maniacal sociopath, and slowly but surely I manifest into my childhood alter ego, Professor Scam. Now, who is this, you may ask? Well, if anyone remembers the episode of Ed, Edd and Eddy titled Robin Ed, you'll know that Professor Scam was the alias of Eddy's villainous persona that he manifested after Captain Melonhead, aka Johnny, foiled one of his schemes. And it was at that point, Eddy had had enough. He'd thrown down the gauntlet. His mind had been overcome with just one singular thought: vengeance. After that, he went and launched this nefarious crusade to try and bring down Captain Melonhead and end his hero days in the cul-de-sac. Now let's rewind to the moment I first laid eyes on Professor Scam on screen. There was a feeling unlike any other that surged through my mind at the time. It was like I was possessed by the Lord of Scam demons. Now, to put things into context, I wasn't one of those kids that played along with the neighbors' kids. There weren't really many kids in my neighborhood. And I didn't live in a cul-de-sac or anything like that. It was just a really wide street, if I remember correctly. But what I didn't realize at the time was that slowly, unconsciously, I was transforming into this caricature of Professor Scam. It was as if mentally I was developing this sick, maniacal desire for nothing but a quarter and gummy worms. I'm not into jawbreakers, so gummy worms are like the equivalent of what those jawbreakers are to the Eds. Now, to bring everything full circle, I had one of those electric-sized cars. I'm pretty sure the Jeep that I had, it was like a little red Jeep. It was souped up with like all-terrain tires, a four-wheel drive system, and a rear-view camera monitor. I swear, I was like a NOS system and a black coat of paint away from my car actually being the Batmobile. So I was really on one even back then. Now keep in mind, I was but the tender age of 7 or 8 at this time, and I had my own car, no parent or guardian to watch me during daylight hours, and this constant urge to just drive around my neighborhood scamming any unsuspecting resident that was unfortunate enough to encounter me on the prowl. So a couple days into my career as Professor Scam, I decided I was gonna roll out in full force, full costume, with one goal in my mind: to ensue absolute chaos in my community. However, unfortunately, on that particular day I decided to launch this campaign, it was dead silent outside. It was more disappointing than deadbeat dad not coming home after going out to get some milk. But it takes a lot more than that to crush the calculating genius of Professor Scam. And so, I did something that would get me thrown into the deepest cell of solitary confinement on Alcatraz. I drove to the very end of my neighborhood where I was specifically told not to drive to by my parents. In fact, I even one-upped my shameless sin by driving on the actual main road itself, which I was told not to do because of the fact that there are actual cars there and I would die in a 1v1 collision with one of them. Now, at this point, my mind had gone far beyond the concept of lunacy. I was nearly challenging God himself. But, unlike Lucifer, I didn't have command of a grand rebellion or anything like that. And little did I know on that tranquil day, God had taken up the form of the CPS. And for those of you who don't know, the CPS is Child Protective Services. It's pretty self-explanatory what it is they do. Now at this point, I'd reached World's End. And by that I mean the very end corner of the street that I lived on. It was a couple blocks down, so it was kind of far. But I realized that I'd foolishly forgotten to charge my car before I ventured out. And the minute I reached this corner, my car died. Now, this derelict corner I found myself stranded on didn't have a Tesla charging station or anything like that nearby. You know, Elon Musk probably wasn't even invented back then, so I couldn't exactly recharge and get myself home. And so I did what any 7 to 8-year-old kid would do in my situation. I hitchhiked for my goddamn life because there was no way in hell I was gonna push my dead car all the way back to my garage that was at least 3+ blocks away. 3 blocks to a kid? I might as well have just been stranded on the interstate at that point. Luckily, it didn't take long for help to arrive. However, it was not the help I'd expected, nor was it the help that I desired. That being said, given my situation, beggars certainly can't be choosers. And if you haven't guessed it by now, the person I had flagged down was an undercover CPS investigator who not only lived in my neighborhood, but was also assigned to investigate my elementary school. I could not have had worse luck in who had picked me up. So she gets out of her unmarked vehicle, shows me her badge and identification, then goes on to interrogate me. And to give you all a clear image of what happened, picture a woman stepping out of her car to a little Oriental boy wearing nothing but a wife beater, floral swim trunks, long white socks, a towel cape tied around his neck, and a dead electric car just sitting right next to me. That should put into perspective the Looney Tune levels of Wile E. Coyote shit that was taking place in that situation. Now, if you're still watching, you're probably thinking to yourself, Jesus, you were a goddamn sociopath as a child, weren't you? And while that might have been true, the aftermath of that incident resulted in both me and my parents receiving a hard reprimanding from the investigator who misunderstood the whole thing. Can't blame her though. To her, it looked like I'd ran away from home with nothing but the towel cape and undergarments I had on. I wasn't even wearing shoes at the time either. So to her, it probably looked like I was an outright victim of neglect who just ran out of gas halfway through his escape attempt. And to wrap up this whole story in a nice little bow, this whole ordeal got me put on my neighborhood watch list, along with a 7-day period of mandatory supervised probation by that CPS agent. Now, keep in mind, this happened to me a long time ago, and it's not indicative of how the CPS runs itself nowadays. And to just make a quick disclaimer, this isn't meant to incriminate the CPS in any way, shape, or form. I'm just sharing this eventful experience I had as a child that really left quite the mark on my psyche in going into my teens and now my adult life, it seems. And with all that being said, I guess the moral of the story here is don't fall for scams and don't let your kid do what I did, lest you and your whole family end up being the clowns of the neighborhood. And yeah, I just felt the need to share this little story since it came back to me so vividly like a vision from That's So Raven. But that's about it. Until next time.